The conference room felt smaller than usual that Tuesday morning. My manager Greg sat across from me, flanked by Valerie from HR and someone I didn't recognize. A young woman, mid-20s maybe, holding a leather portfolio and wearing the eager expression of someone about to start their dream job. "Christine, thanks for coming in," Greg started, not quite meeting my eyes. "I wanted to introduce you to Megan Clark. She's joining our business development team." I nodded politely at Megan, who smiled back nervously. "Megan comes to us with an impressive background," Greg continued, reading from notes he'd clearly prepared. "Top of her class at Northwestern's Kellogg School, 2 years in consulting at McKinsey, really excited to dive into relationship management." I waited. There was more coming, and I could already feel where this was headed. "Given your expertise with our most complex clients, especially the North Star account, we'd like you to spend the next 4 weeks bringing Megan up to speed. Show her the ropes, introduce her to key stakeholders, really give her the full picture of how you manage these relationships." There it was. I'd been at Titan Solutions for 7 years. 7 years of building client relationships from scratch, turning small contracts into multi-million-dollar partnerships, and establishing myself as the go-to person for accounts that required finesse and institutional knowledge. The North Star account alone was worth $18 million annually, a relationship I'd nurtured for 5 years through multiple leadership changes on their side. And now they wanted me to train my replacement. "So Megan will be taking over my accounts?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Greg shifted uncomfortably. "We're restructuring the team. Your role is being redefined to focus more on new business acquisition. Megan will handle relationship management for existing strategic accounts. Corporate speak for, you're being demoted, and we're giving your most valuable work to someone making half your salary." "When were you planning to tell me about this restructure?" I asked. "We're telling you now," Valerie from HR interjected with a tight smile. "The transition will happen over the next month. We want to make sure it's smooth for all parties involved, especially for our clients." "Of course," I said, "smooth for the clients." What I didn't say, this decision would be anything but smooth. Because what they didn't understand was that the North Star relationship wasn't just about account management or project delivery. It was about trust built over 5 years, about understanding the unspoken dynamics of their organization, about knowing exactly when to push and when to pull back. You can't transfer that in 4 weeks of training. But they were about to learn a lesson, the expensive way. I'm happy to started. I turned to Megan, who'd been sitting quietly through this entire conversation. She looked excited and nervous and completely unaware that she was being set up to fail. "Welcome to the team," I said, extending my hand. "Let's grab some coffee and I'll start walking you through everything." After we left the conference room, I led Megan to my office. She was chatty, enthusiastic, asking questions about the company culture and the team dynamic. I answered politely, professionally, while my mind worked through what was actually happening here. 3 months ago, I'd pushed back against a decision Greg wanted to make that would have compromised client trust for short-term revenue. I'd been right. The decision would have backfired spectacularly. But Greg didn't like being challenged in front of senior leadership. Since then, I'd noticed subtle shifts. Being left off email chains. Not invited to strategic planning sessions. My input being sought less frequently. This wasn't about restructuring. This was about pushing out someone who'd become inconvenient. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something. This story isn't about sabotaging someone innocent or refusing to do my job. It's about what happens when companies treat people like interchangeable parts and relationships like transferable assets. When they forget that some things can't be taught in a month of training sessions because they're built on years of trust and hundreds of small moments that matter. If you've ever been forced to train your own replacement, if you've watched someone try to take over work you built knowing they didn't have the foundation to sustain it, stick with me. Because what my company was about to learn was that you can hand over passwords and processes, but you can't hand over relationships. And some lessons cost millions of dollars. My name is Christine Barnes, and I'd been the Senior Director of Strategic Accounts at Titan Solutions for 7 years. We provided software implementation and consulting services to Fortune 500 companies. Complex, high-touch work where relationships mattered as much as technical delivery. I wasn't a natural salesperson. I'd come up through project management, learned the business from the technical side, and discovered I had a talent for translating between what clients needed and what our company could deliver. More importantly, I'd learned how to build trust with senior executives who'd been burned by consultants before. The North Star account was my masterpiece. When I'd inherited it 5 years ago, it was a struggling $2 million contract with constant complaints about delivery quality and communication breakdowns. North Star's CTO, Robert Chen, had been ready to cancel and move to a competitor. I'd spent 6 months just listening, learning their pain points, understanding their organizational politics, figuring out what they actually needed versus what they said they needed. I'd rebuilt the relationship from the ground up, one honest conversation at a time. 5 years later, North Star was our largest account. $18 million annually. 0 complaints. They'd expanded our services into 4 additional business units. Robert Chen called me directly when issues arose because he trusted me to handle them without corporate bullshit. That kind of relationship doesn't transfer in a 4-week training program. But Greg apparently thought it could. Over the next week, I walked Megan through the basics. Our service offerings, pricing structures, contract terms, delivery processes. She took meticulous notes, asked intelligent questions, and seemed genuinely eager to learn. She wasn't stupid or incompetent. She just didn't have the context. "So how do you handle it when clients push back on timeline estimates?" she asked during one of our sessions. "Depends on the client," I said. With North Star, for example, I never push back directly on timelines. Instead, I walk them through the dependencies and let them see why the timeline is what it is. Robert hates being told no, but he respects transparency. Got it. Show, don't tell. With Robert specifically, yes. But with Linda at North Star's finance division, she actually prefers directness. Tell her the answer up front, then provide supporting details if she asks. Different people, different approaches. Megan scribbled notes. How do I know which approach to use with which person? You learn over time. Trial and error, mostly. Pay attention to how people respond and adjust accordingly. She looked slightly overwhelmed. That seems like something that takes a while to figure out. It does, I said. Years usually. The unspoken subtext hung in the air between us. She had 4 weeks. During week 2, I started introducing Megan to North Star's key stakeholders. I scheduled calls with Robert, Linda, Marcus from operations, and Priya from their innovation lab. On each call, I explained that Megan would be taking over as their primary contact, while I transitioned to focusing on new client acquisition. The responses were polite, but telling. Robert Chen was quiet. We've built a strong working relationship. I'm sure Megan is very capable, but this is unexpected. I understand. Megan will be excellent. She's been training extensively and will have my full support during the transition. Your full support meaning you'll still be available if issues arise? I chose my words carefully. I'll be focusing on new business development, but Megan will have access to all our resources. Another pause. I see. Well, best of luck with your new focus. After the call, Megan looked nervous. He didn't seem thrilled about the change. Robert's cautious about transitions. He'll warm up once you establish your own relationship with him. What I didn't say, Robert had been burned by relationship transitions before. 2 previous account managers before me had left North Star feeling like they were just a number. I'd spent months rebuilding trust. He wasn't going to automatically extend that trust to someone new just because the company said so. Similar conversations happened with Linda and Marcus. Polite acknowledgement of the transition, subtle concerns about continuity, careful questions about whether this was my choice or the company's decision. I kept my answers professional and neutral, But I could see them reading between the lines. This wasn't my idea. I was being pushed out of the relationship and they knew it. By week 3, Megan was getting anxious. There's so much I still don't understand. The relationship dynamics, the history of why certain decisions were made, the informal communication channels. How am I supposed to learn all of that, Inu? 1 more week? You probably won't, I said honestly. You'll learn by doing. When issues come up, you'll figure out how to handle them. That's how I learned. But you had years to build these relationships. I'm being thrown in without that foundation. I nodded. You're right. It's not ideal, but it's the hand you've been dealt. She studied me for a moment. Can I ask you something? Is this transition happening because of something you did? Everyone keeps saying it's a restructure, but it feels like there's more to it. I appreciated her directness. I challenged a decision Greg wanted to make 3 months ago. I was right to challenge it, but Greg didn't appreciate it. This is the consequence. That's messed up. Welcome to corporate politics. So I'm basically being set up to take over something you built, as punishment for you doing your job well, more or less. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know if I want to be part of that. Then you should think carefully about whether you want to take this role. Because once I'm out of the picture, you're going to be managing these relationships on your own. And if they fall apart, guess who's going to get blamed? Her face went pale. Me. Exactly. During week 4, we focused on North Star's upcoming contract renewal. The current contract expired in 6 weeks. Renewal negotiations typically started 2 months before expiration, which meant we were already behind schedule. North Star's been our client for 5 years, I explained. Renewals have always been straightforward because we've consistently delivered value and maintained strong relationships. But this year is different. Different how? They hired a new CFO 8 months ago. Sandra Whitmore. She's been tasked with cutting costs across all vendor relationships. She's been reviewing every contract, challenging every expense, pushing back on renewals that she doesn't see clear ROI for. How do we handle that? I've been building a relationship with Sandra over the past 8 months. Monthly check-ins, quarterly business reviews, showing clear metrics on value, delivered, case studies, demonstrating ROI. I've been preparing for this renewal for months. And now, I have to take that over, yes. In 2 weeks before the renewal conversation happens, yes. Megan looked like she was going to be sick. Christine, I don't know if I can do this. Then you should tell Greg that. Because if you go into that renewal negotiation without the relationship foundation and preparation I built, there's a good chance Sandra's going to use this transition as an opportunity to renegotiate terms or even put the contract out for competitive bid. What happens if they do that? We could lose an $18 million account. And Greg will blame you for not managing the relationship properly. She stood up abruptly. I need to talk to Greg. Good idea. After Megan left, I sat alone in my office. I'd been completely honest with her about the situation. I hadn't sabotaged anything or refused to train her. I'd simply been truthful about what she was walking into. And the truth was, this transition was being executed in the worst possible way at the worst possible time. 20 minutes later, Greg appeared at my door looking irritated. Christine, Megan says you've been discouraging her from taking over your accounts. I've been honest with her about the challenges. There's a difference. She's questioning whether she's ready for this role. She's right to question that. You're asking her to take over complex client relationships during a critical contract renewal period with 3 weeks of training. That's not setting her up for success. She has your support during the transition. I'll be working on new business development, remember? That's the restructure we're doing. How much support do you think I'll be providing when I'm focused on a completely different function? Greg's jaw tightened. You're undermining this transition. I'm being realistic about what's required to maintain these relationships. If you think 3 weeks of training transfers 5 years of trust building, then you fundamentally misunderstand how strategic accounts work. Maybe if you had a better attitude about this, the transition would go more smoothly. There it was. The real issue. Not whether this was the right decision, but whether I was complying enthusiastically enough with a decision designed to push me out. Greg, I've been professional and thorough in training Megan. I've introduced her to every key stakeholder, documented every process, shared every piece of institutional knowledge I have. What I won't do is pretend this is a good idea when it's obviously not. Then maybe you're the problem here. Maybe I am. But in 6 weeks, when the North Star renewal goes sideways, you'll have a different perspective on who the problem was. He left without another word. My last day working on strategic accounts was a Friday in late September. I'd spent the final week doing formal handoff meetings with Megan, documenting everything I could think of, and sending transition emails to all my clients. The email to Robert Chen was carefully worded. Robert, as of Monday, Megan Clark will be your primary point of contact for all North Star matters. She's been training extensively and has full access to our team's resources. I'm transitioning to focus on new client acquisition, but I want to thank you personally for the partnership we've built over the past 5 years. It's been a privilege working with you and the North Star team. His response came within an hour. Christine, I appreciate everything you've done for us. You've been an exceptional partner. I'm disappointed to see this change happening, especially given the timing with our renewal coming up. I'll give Megan every opportunity to prove herself, but I'll be honest, I'm concerned about continuity during this critical period. Best of luck in your new role. Translation: we're not happy about this, and if the transition goes badly, we're going to reconsider the entire relationship. On Monday, I started my new role focusing on new business acquisition. My office moved to a different floor. My calendar cleared of all standing meetings with existing clients. My access to various client files and systems was adjusted to reflect my new focus. I was effectively cut off from the accounts I'd built. For the first week, I tried to focus on my new responsibilities. Prospecting calls, industry research, building pipelines for potential new clients. The work was fine, but I kept checking my email, half expecting to see panicked messages from Megan or angry notes from clients. Nothing came. Radio silence. Week 2, I ran into Marcus from North Star in the lobby of our building. He was there for a quarterly business review meeting. Christine, good to see you. How's the new role? Good, thanks. How are things going with Megan? He hesitated. She's learning. There have been some communication hiccups, but nothing major yet. Though I'll be honest, we miss having you as our main contact. You just knew how things worked. Megan's smart. She'll figure it out, maybe. But there's a lot to figure out. Sandra from finance has been asking pointed questions about RO and contract value. Megan's been scrambling to pull together materials for the renewal conversation. It's been a bit chaotic. The renewal's coming up soon, right? 3 weeks. Sandra wants to meet next week to start negotiations. Between you and me, I think she's looking for reasons to cut the contract or demand significant price reductions. And Megan doesn't have the relationship foundation with her to navigate that effectively. I nodded sympathetically but didn't offer to help. It wasn't my account anymore. Well, good luck with the renewal, I said. I'm sure it'll work out. Marcus gave me a look that said he wasn't sure at all. Week 3, I heard through the grapevine that the preliminary renewal meeting with North Star had gone poorly. Megan had presented OI metrics, but Sandra had challenged the methodology and questioned whether the value justified the cost. Robert had been diplomatic, but hadn't strongly advocated for renewal the way he would have if I'd been in the room. The meeting had ended with Sandra saying she wanted to explore options and see competitive proposals before committing to renewal. Translation: they were putting the contract out for bid. Greg called an emergency meeting with senior leadership to discuss the situation. I wasn't invited, but word spread quickly. North Star, our largest account, was at risk. The renewal that should have been a rubber stamp was now a competitive situation where we could lose everything. On Thursday afternoon, I got a surprise visit from Valerie in HR tour. Christine, I wanted to check in and see how you're adjusting to your new role. It's going well, thanks. I also wanted to ask if you'd be willing to have a conversation with the North Star client team. There seem to be some challenges with the renewal negotiations, and your historical context might be helpful. I leaned back in my chair. Valerie, I'm not on that account anymore. That's Megan's responsibility now. I understand, but given your relationship with Robert and Sandra, your input could be valuable during this critical time. You mean now that things are going sideways, you want me to step back in and fix it? She had the decency to look uncomfortable. We want to make sure we're doing everything possible to retain the account. Then you should have thought about that before reassigning the relationship to someone with 3 weeks of training during a renewal period, with a new CFO who's looking to cut costs. This situation was entirely predictable. Christine, I know you're frustrated with how the transition was handled. I'm not frustrated. I'm realistic. You wanted to push me out of these accounts to make room for cheaper labor. That was your choice. But now you're facing the consequences of that choice, and you want me to bail you out. The company made a decision. Now the company can deal with the results. I'm focusing on new business acquisition, remember? That's my job now. Valerie studied me for a moment. You do understand that if we lose North Star, it impacts everyone? Revenue, bonuses, potentially jobs? I do. Which is why it was a terrible idea to disrupt that relationship in the first place. But that's not my problem to solve anymore. She left, looking troubled. That evening, I got a call on my personal cell from Robert Chen. We'd exchanged personal numbers years ago for emergency situations. Christine, I need to talk to you off the record. Sure, what's up? This transition to Megan has been a disaster. She's competent, but she doesn't understand our organization or our priorities. The renewal negotiation last week was painful to watch. Sandra's ready to put this out for bid, and I don't have confidence that Titan is going to present the strongest case for renewal. I'm sorry to hear that, Robert. What can I do to help? Can you be involved in the renewal negotiations? Your presence might make a difference. I took a breath. Robert, I'd love to help, but I'm not on your account anymore. That's not my role. Can you make it your role? Talk to your management. They made it very clear that my focus is supposed to be on new business. If I step back into your account, it undermines the entire transition they orchestrated. So what am I supposed to do? Watch a 5-year partnership fall apart because your company made a bad management decision? You could do what Sandra's suggesting. Explore other options. See if there's a provider out there who values relationship continuity and doesn't treat accounts like interchangeable commodities. Silence on the other end. You're saying we should look at competitors? I'm saying you should do what's best for North Star. If Titan isn't providing the level of partnership you need, you shouldn't stay out of loyalty. Business is business. Christine, we've always been straight with each other, so let me be straight now. If Titan loses our contract, it's not because of Megan. It's because the company made a decision that signaled to us that this relationship doesn't matter as much as we thought it did. You were the relationship. Without you, it's just a vendor transaction. I appreciate you saying that, Robert. Will you at least think about whether there's anything you can do? I will. But I can't make any promises. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about what Robert had said. The company had treated the North Star relationship like an asset that could be reassigned without consequence. They had assumed that the client loyalty was to Titan, not to the person who'd built the relationship. They'd been wrong. The next morning, I had a meeting scheduled with our CEO, Michael Torres. It had been on the calendar for weeks, a standard check-in about my transition to new business development. I arrived, prepared to discuss prospecting strategies and pipeline development. Instead, Michael cut straight to the point. Christine, I'm going to be direct. We're at risk of losing North Star. Greg tells me you've been unwilling to help with the renewal negotiations. That's not quite accurate. I've been told my job is new business acquisition, not strategic account management. I'm doing the job you assigned me. We need your help to save this relationship. What specifically do you need? Your presence in the renewal negotiations or relationship with Robert and Sandra are? Decision. While Megan watches and presumably learns nothing useful. Michael's expression hardened. I want you to do what's right for the company. Michael, with respect, the company decided what was right when you restructured my role. You wanted to move me away from strategic accounts. You got what you wanted. Now you're dealing with the consequences. The consequence being we lose $18 million in annual revenue. The consequence being you learn that relationships aren't transferable assets. That you can't just hand over passwords and processes and expect the same results. That trust takes years to build and can be destroyed in a single, poorly executed transition. So you're refusing to help? I'm saying that if you want me to save this relationship, it comes with conditions. Which are, first, I want my strategic accounts rolled back. Fully. Not as a temporary fix, but permanent. Second, I want it acknowledged publicly that the restructure was a mistake. Third, I want a seat at the table when decisions like this are made in the future so we don't repeat this disaster. Michael was quiet for a long moment. You're using the North Star situation as leverage. I'm establishing the terms under which I'll clean up this mess. You can accept them or not. But if you don't, you should prepare for North Star to walk. And probably a few other strategic accounts once they see that Titan's commitment to relationships is negotiable. Other accounts are at risk. When clients see that a 5-year partnership can be disrupted for no clear reason, they start questioning their own relationships. Marcus from North Star mentioned that their team has been having conversations about whether Titan values long-term partnerships or just sees them as revenue lines that can be managed by anyone. Michael's face went pale. How many accounts are we talking about? I had 6 strategic accounts. North Star was the largest. But Carson Industries, Belmont Systems, and Apex Group all have similar relationship dynamics. If they see North Star leave, they're going to ask themselves whether they're next. That's $47 in total annual revenue. Now you're seeing the real cost of the decision to restructure my role. He stood up and walked to his window, looking out over the city. What you're asking for is essentially holding the company hostage. What I'm asking for is to be valued appropriately for the relationships I've built and maintained. If that feels like hostage-taking, maybe it says something about how the company has been treating me. He turned back to face me. If I agree to your terms, you'll save the North Star relationship? I'll do everything I can. But, Michael, there's no guarantee. The damage has been done. Robert and Sandra have lost confidence in Titan's commitment to the partnership. I can try to rebuild that, but it's going to take time and genuine change, not just putting me back in a meeting and pretending nothing happened. How do we demonstrate genuine change? You start by acknowledging the mistake. Publicly. Not just to North Star, but internally. You tell the organization that the restructure was poorly conceived and poorly executed, and that we're correcting course. You make it clear that strategic relationships aren't commodities to be reassigned based on salary optimization. Michael was quiet for a long time. I need to discuss this with the board. You have until Monday. That's when the final renewal negotiation with North Star is scheduled. If I'm not in that meeting with full authority to negotiate on behalf of Titan, they're walking. I stood to leave. Christine, Michael said it as I reached the door. For what it's worth. I should have pushed back when Greg proposed this restructure. I knew it was a bad idea. I let it happen anyway because I didn't want to override him in front of the team. That's a leadership failure, Michael. And it's costing the company $18 million to learn that lesson. Over the weekend, I got a call from Michael. The board had agreed to my terms. I'd be reinstated as Senior Director of Strategic Accounts, effective immediately. Greg would be issuing a company-wide memo acknowledging that the restructure had been premature and poorly timed, and that the company was recommitting to the strategic account model that had driven our growth. Monday morning, the memo went out. It was carefully worded. Corporate speak, but the message was clear. They'd screwed up, and they were fixing it. Greg didn't make eye contact when I passed him in the hallway. At 2 p.m., I joined the North Star renewal negotiation via video conference. Robert, Sandra, Linda, Marcus, and Priya were all on the call. Megan was there too, looking relieved to see me. "Christine," Robert said when I joined. "Good to see you back in your proper role." "Good to be back, Robert. I understand we have some concerns to address about the renewal." Sandra leaned forward. "Christine, I'll be direct. The transition to Megan created chaos and uncertainty. We've been questioning whether Titan actually values this partnership or just sees us as a revenue number. That's made me seriously consider whether we should be exploring alternatives." "I understand, and you're right to question that. The transition was handled poorly. It wasn't fair to you. It wasn't fair to Megan. And frankly, it wasn't fair to me. The company made a mistake." "Companies make mistakes all the time," Sandra said. "The question is whether they learn from them." "We're learning. The restructure has been reversed. I'm back in my role permanently. And we've implemented new protocols to ensure strategic account transitions, if they happen in the future, are done with proper planning, client consultation, and adequate preparation time." "That's good to hear. But it doesn't address the fundamental question. Does Titan value long-term partnerships? Or are we just a line item that can be managed by whoever's available?" "Titan values long-term partnerships. That's what I've been trying to tell our leadership for months. The restructure was an attempt to optimize costs without considering what would be lost in the process. Now they understand. This partnership matters. Your trust matters. And we're committed to rebuilding whatever confidence has been lost." Robert spoke up. "Sandra, I've worked with Christine for 5 years. She's never given me a reason to doubt her word. If she says things are changing, I believe her." Sandra looked between Robert and me. "Okay, I'm willing to give this another shot. But the renewal terms need to reflect the disruption we've experienced. I want a 5% reduction in fees, quarterly business reviews, with Christine personally attending, and a commitment that any future account transitions will be discussed with us 3 months in advance." I didn't hesitate. Done. All 3 terms are acceptable. We spent the next hour finalizing the renewal details. By the end of the call, North Star had committed to a 3-year renewal with expanded services in 2 additional business units. After the call ended, Megan turned to me. "Thank you for coming back." I was drowning and didn't know how to say it. "You weren't drowning because you're incompetent. You were drowning because you were set up to fail. This wasn't your fault. What happens to me now, that's cool. Up to you. You can stay in business development and learn under better circumstances, or you can move to a different role. But you shouldn't be managing strategic accounts until you've had time to actually build relationships, not just take over existing ones." She nodded. "I think I'd like to stay and learn properly. If that's an option. I'll make sure it is." Over the next month, I worked to stabilize all my strategic accounts. Reached out personally to each one, acknowledged the disruption, and recommitted to the partnerships. Carson Industries and Belmont Systems had both been quietly exploring alternatives. Both decided to stay after seeing that Titan was serious about valuing relationships. Greg was quietly reassigned to a different division. Not fired, just moved where he'd do less damage. He'd been the architect of the restructure that had nearly cost the company $47 in annual revenue. That kind of mistake doesn't get forgotten easily in corporate environments. Megan transitioned to a junior business development role where she could learn client management without the pressure of maintaining million-dollar relationships. She turned out to be quite good at prospecting and initial relationship building, just not at taking over complex accounts with no preparation. 6 months after the North Star renewal crisis, Michael Torres asked me to present at our annual leadership summit about what we'd learned from the situation. Standing in front of 200 managers and executives, I titled my presentation, "What We Almost Lost and Why." "Last year," I began, "this company nearly lost its largest client because of a decision to treat strategic relationships like interchangeable assets. We assumed that account management was about processes and systems, not people and trust. We were wrong. I clicked to the next slide showing the revenue impact analysis. If North Star had walked, we would have lost $18 million annually, but the real cost would have been higher. 3 other strategic accounts were actively exploring alternatives, concerned that if we disrupt a 5-year partnership with no clear business reason, their accounts could be next. Total potential revenue impact: $47. That's 13% of our annual revenue. That's 13% of our annual revenue. The room was silent. The reason we didn't lose those accounts had nothing to do with our technology or pricing. It was because the relationships I'd built over years gave us credibility when we admitted we'd made a mistake. Robert Chen told me explicitly, "We're staying because you're back, not because of Titan's product." I paused, looking around the room. Here's what I want everyone in this room to understand. Strategic accounts aren't revenue numbers on a spreadsheet. They're relationships built over years through hundreds of interactions, crisis moments where we showed up, promises kept, and trust earned. You can't transfer that in a training session. You can't reassign it to save salary costs. You can't optimize it away. I clicked to my final slide. What we learned: first, people matter more than processes. Second, trust takes years to build and moments to destroy. Third, sometimes the most expensive thing you can do is try to save money in the wrong place. And fourth, if someone tells you a decision is going to backfire, maybe listen to them before you find out they were right the expensive way. After the presentation, I had a line of people wanting to talk. Managers asking how to better value their strategic team members. Our people wanting to revise their restructuring protocols. Executives acknowledging they'd made similar mistakes in their divisions. But the conversation that mattered most was with a young account manager named Teresa, who'd been with the Worry company for 2 years. "Christine, I'm being told they want to transition some of my accounts to a newer team member to develop their skills. After hearing your presentation, I'm worried this is the same kind of mistake. What should I do?" I pulled out a business card and wrote my personal email on the back. First, document everything. The conversation about the transition, the reasons given, the timeline. Second, assess whether the transition makes sense from a client perspective or just a cost perspective. Third, reach out to me directly if you need advice, because what happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone else if we can prevent it. You're telling me to push back. I'm telling you that. Your relationships have value, and you shouldn't let anyone convince you they don't. Companies need to learn that restructuring isn't a free action. It has consequences. Sometimes expensive ones. A year after the crisis, North Star renewed again. This time, the renewal conversation took 15 minutes. Sandra told me at the end of the call, "This is how partnerships are supposed to work. Consistent, reliable, built on trust. Thank you for fighting to get back to this. Thank you for giving us another chance." After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about everything that had happened. They tried to push me out, tried to replace me with someone cheaper, tried to pretend relationships didn't matter. And they'd nearly destroyed the most valuable thing the company had built: client trust. The cost of learning that lesson had been high. Legal fees from the rushed contract. Discounted renewal terms to keep clients from walking. Internal chaos and lowered morale. And the intangible cost of trust, both with clients and employees. But they had learned. Or at least, they'd learned enough to not make the same mistake again. If you stayed with me through this whole story, I want you to know something. This isn't about revenge or making people pay for their mistakes. It's about understanding that relationships matter. That expertise matters. That trust takes years to build and moments to lose. If you've ever been told to train your replacement, if you've watched someone try to take over work you built, If you've been pushed aside for someone cheaper or younger or more convenient, remember this. The relationships you build are valuable. The trust you earn matters. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is let others learn why you were valuable by experiencing what happens when you're gone. If this resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment sharing your own experiences with being replaced or having to train someone to take over your work. Your stories help others feel less alone and help companies understand the real cost of treating people like interchangeable parts. Remember, sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is doing exactly what they asked, professionally and thoroughly, and letting the results speak for themselves. Train your replacement. Document everything. Be professional. And then step back and watch what you built either stand on its own or fall apart without you. Either way, you'll know your true value. And so will they.